Welcome to Talent Acquisition Trends and Strategy. I'm your host, James Mackey. Today, we are joined by Rahul Yodh, and we're very excited to jump into some tactics. We're going to be going over some more details in terms of running talent acquisition, similar to a revenue org, and all sorts of cool stuff about running talent acquisition systems and a data-driven approach. And we're going to be going into some other topics, including annual planning and how to report to other executives within the organization, just high level philosophy on talent acquisition and how to ensure that you're set up for success to hit hiring goals, because we all know there's so many times where we have this goal in mind, and then 6 weeks into the year, we're already behind. So we're going to be talking with Rahul about how to prevent that. And then for everybody tuning in, thank you for your consistent support in doing so. We're on season 2 of the show. We've had over 50 episodes, and it's been really incredible to see the progression into the number 1 spot for talent acquisition. So, we're upping the content. We're creating it more valuable, and that's exactly why Rahul is here, is to provide us with a lot of great insights. And you're going to walk away from this conversation with a lot of what you need to put together an effective annual plan and to be successful in 2023. So without further ado, Rahul, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be here, James. I'm so glad that we were able to connect on LinkedIn, and you posted something that really kind of struck a chord with me, running TA like a revenue org.
Yep. Yeah, more and more people. It's like it's a growing movement. Hopefully we're accelerating it by the work that we're doing, producing this content. I had a great conversation with Brandon Metcalf. He developed a tool called Talent Rover, which is specifically focused on the staffing industry, but it was like an applicant tracking system that was built on Salesforce. And so you could actually optimize and put together a tech stack leveraging revenue tools for talent acquisition. And I think you mentioned you heard we brought him onto the show for season 2. He was the first episode of season 2, and he's building a new ATS that could be leveraged for staffing or in-house, and it's built off the Salesforce backbone, which I'm incredibly excited about. So I think and that kind of inspired the post that you saw probably.
Yeah, I loved hearing what he had to say, and I'm interested to see what comes of the tools that they're building on Salesforce, because we are definitely a very Salesforce driven organization. So something that I will be keeping my ear to the ground for.
Yeah, love it. So before we jump into these topics, I want everybody to have a clear understanding of the environment that you work with, your role, the environment that you work in, because it's important people to understand your perspective and where you're coming from on these topics. So do you mind taking a minute or so to tell us about you, the type of company you work for, the type of hiring you do, stuff like that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I'm vice president of talent acquisition for New Western. I'm responsible for TA strategy and results, and oversee a remote and distributed team of 18 really talented, hardworking recruiting professionals. And I want to say 10 different metropolitan areas in 6 different states. And I started my career in recruiting with staffing with Robert Half, moved into kind of retained executive search, and eventually founded a boutique search firm in 2009, which in hindsight was probably the worst time ever to take that leap. But that experience forced me to be really more strategic, bring more value to my clients, and go beyond just that transaction, which was, a body in a seat. Eventually, my firm was named best of by some leading industry publications, and I said to myself, I think I've done what I set out to do, and I exited via acquisition by a national staffing firm. And so after my exit, I said, I really want to go in-house. That's where I haven't been. I want to see my impact from start to finish. No matter how deep I got with my clients, it was still just a small slice, right? And so I worked as an advisor in private equity, doing transactional due diligence and operational advisory. And eventually I made my way to New Western 2 years ago, so early 2021. And New Western operates a marketplace for investors to find homes to rehab. We buy a house every 13 minutes, and we only own that asset for about 90 minutes. So it's high velocity, it's fast paced, and we're headquartered in Dallas, Texas, but we have offices and team members in 22 states, I think, and over 40 markets. And just for some perspective for the audience, in 2022, we onboarded 937 new team members, ranging from C-suite and directors all the way down to the lifeblood of our team, our organization, New Western, which is our field agents who buy and sell residential real estate assets. And we also expanded into 6 new states and 15 new markets. Overall, it was double the amount of hiring that we did in 2021.
That's incredible. And I think that this is why you are such a perfect guest to discuss running talent acquisition like a revenue org, understanding the importance of process, technology, having a data-centric approach, and having a sales-bent recruiting organization. And I do have a bias towards, I think, talent acquisition leaders that come from an agency background. I think that there's problems in the agency model with it almost being
For sure.
too sales bent,
Yeah.
like too focused on objection handling versus quality of hire. So for everybody tuning in that doesn't have an agency background, I understand the challenges. I just think from a foundation perspective, it's very valuable to have at least a couple recruiters from that background, because when you bring them in house and you teach them this strategic skill set, they're incredibly well rounded, and you can learn how to increase quality of hire and increase vetting skills, but having that persuasion and hustle that comes from an agency background, I feel like is incredibly valuable.
Yeah. I always say I can train recruiters on how to evaluate talent and how to work the process properly, but I can't teach them how to hustle. That is something that is in you from an early stage in your career, and that's how you are as a professional or how you are not. And I think that's where my agency background gives me a really strong foundation in things like pipeline metrics and just grit and hustle and just that competitive attitude and mindset that you need to win.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, for everybody tuning in again that doesn't come from that background, of course you can have that hustle and grit. I think it's without agency side, but I will say when you're hiring for your team, you're more likely to get a recruiter that has that mindset, because if they were successful in staffing, it means that they had that hustle and grit, versus if you hire somebody, maybe that's a career switcher, or maybe somebody that you got directly from university. It's kind of a gamble whether or not they're going to have that kind of sales bent competitive background. And so when I look at, staffing companies are taking that risk. And so you don't necessarily have to. So I'm not saying you need a full, team of agency recruiters, but it really does, I think, lower risk to have a higher performing team personally.
Yeah, absolutely. And like James said, it's all about, it's all about having a few people like that, right? Because that culture then kind of permeates throughout the team. And so if you've got a few folks with that agency background, they understand, they get it, and they're able to kind of drive the culture a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. Let's start high level and just like the importance of running like a revenue org, how it's impacted your ability to basically, I think you more than doubled in size last year.
Yeah.
So I think, like, can we just get into how this approach has enabled you to achieve the results that you need to?
For sure. So, my background, I feel like I've been a revenue org leader, right? I was a business owner. I built a business, so that's as revenue org leadership as you can get. And ultimately, what we in TA deliver to an organization, which is people and talent, especially organizations like ours where we deliver sales talent, we have a direct impact on revenue. I was just talking to one of our co-founders earlier this week, and I think he said it best. He said, marketing is driving lead generation. However, hiring more sales talent also drives lead generation.
Right. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And so when you're thinking about, like, when you walked into the environment, how much was the organization already kind of operating from this philosophy, or can you walk us through that process? Like, okay, so you get the role at your new position. How do you go about evaluating the way that things are currently done? And then how do you go about taking steps to initially make that transition to running it more like a revenue org?
Yeah, I think first and foremost was when I was evaluating the position, knowing that this was a top-down initiative, right? The recruiting, talent acquisition, acquiring talent was the number one priority for the company. And so knowing that gave me a lot of confidence, right? And then initially it was all about, hey, I got to get in there and I've got to really get a read on the situation. I've got to understand where we are and where we need to go. And so the first order of business was I got to dig into the data. Like, first of all, what kind of data do we have? And what can I see and what kind of insights can I get from it? Because without data, you're just kind of you're going by gut, right? It's like going out in the field and drilling for oil without any kind of geological survey or map or anything like that. And you're like, okay, I think I've got a gut feeling that this is the issue. But with data, you can really figure out where the issues are, where the strengths are, where the weaknesses are, and then drill into those things.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I think too, it sounds like when you're evaluating the role, it's making sure that talent acquisition truly has a seat at the leadership table and is a priority in terms of like talent strategy being at the top of the priority list, right? Because obviously the value of the individuals working on the team are driving value for every department, whether it's revenue or, if it's a tech company, product engineering, the best fit people, I should say, are the ones that are going to be able to drive the best outcomes and most value exponentially for the customer base. So, could you give us some more insight? Like, how did you evaluate, the culture, if you will, like when speaking with the executive team, making sure that you had a seat at the leadership table? Because I think it's right. Like you can always you can try to convince a leadership team to change.
Yeah.
But sometimes that's not possible. So like my advice is similar to what you're saying. Like when you're evaluating the opportunity, getting on a leadership team that sees value in what you're bringing to the table as an executive function that's driving business outcomes. It's not just something that funnels up necessarily into HR. Not saying that, sometimes that is the right thing to do, but depending on the CPO leader. But, I think it's just making sure that you're going to have a seat at the table to make sure that you can understand the company's objectives and work backwards to build a hiring plan to ensure they can hit that. So can you tell us more about how you went about evaluating the culture and the leadership team and what things you look for in other leaders within the organization to feel confident that they're going to, empower you to have control over the things you need to have control over in order to generate the outcomes they need you to generate?
Yeah. For me, it was pretty easy, right? It was asking some of the right questions and really speaking to the key stakeholders, right? The ones that would be driving that top down strategy. And that in our case, it was our two co-founders, and I had a chance to meet with them before taking on the role, and they left me with really no doubt that recruiting was a priority. Recruiting was important. There was a significant business need to acquiring talent, and I walked away from that conversation saying, no issues. This is an organization that is going to allow me to operate and execute a strategy without really holding me back in any way.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's the other reason I think that what we talked about, TA leadership needing a real seat at the leadership table at the executive level is because talent acquisition impacts all departments. Right? Like we need to be part of the conversation. I mean, the biggest expense within most companies is payroll. And so it's directly going to be correlated to the success of every department, and being able to not only to influence that, but understanding that talent acquisition is under a very tight deadline.
Yeah.
And sometimes, HR professionals maybe their philosophies on something different. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Like, in terms of making sure there's alignment between TA and HR and making sure that talent acquisition has the ability to move fast and whatnot.
So I think it starts with I'm fortunate enough to be part of our executive team. So being in the room allows me to be proactive instead of reactive, right? And then I've in talking to a lot of my peers in the TA space, a lot of them struggle with being part of an HR or people department, right? HR and TA have two different skill sets, goals, stakeholders. HR is very much a people function, responsible for nurturing, engaging, developing talent. And TA is sales. It's a sales function where the strategy and approach to acquiring a new hire is so similar to acquiring a new customer. And now you layer in kind of that hyper competitive talent market where you need speed and urgency and efficiency. And you can see where there might be some friction between TA and HR in many companies. And I think we're starting to see a slow shift in the market where organizations are starting to separate HR and TA, with TA reporting into the business side, which is directly impacted by TA's results. And that's where I think I'm pretty lucky to be at an organization like New Western, where we have that top-down talent strategy, and our people and TA teams are very much aligned. We have buy-in, and we operate kind of with that same mindset of, we all know that acquiring talent is critical to the success of our company.
So one of the things that I post a lot of content about on LinkedIn is that my talent strategy and belief is that, and this comes from literally working with over 150 companies to help them hire. So I've been doing that for the last 8 years. So this is not just based off some, opinion that's an assumption. It's based on a lot of experience that my company has helping companies hire. I believe that every leader across an organization should have a key performance metric being their hiring plan for the year, because as a talent acquisition leader, there's so many things that we cannot control. And so we can put in place the best process and tech stack and reporting and transparency and visibility, options available, but we can't ultimately control if, for instance, like a VP of engineering is going to actually deliver on those best practices, or if they're going to reschedule with a candidate 3 times in a row to the point the candidate drops out of the process. Right.
Yeah.
So I think it's curious to get your thoughts on that. Obviously companies can be effective without it. So like if your team doesn't do that, it's not like I'm not throwing a jab or anything, but I'm curious to get your opinion on that topic. If you think it's a good idea, and if you have anything like that in place at your company.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is, it's really, really important to have that alignment and have that accountability. Right. And that's one of our core values is accountability. And, each of our hiring managers has a hiring goal that they need to hit. They're held accountable to those goals by their managers. We give them visibility into the hiring pipelines and dashboards. And then we have regular meetings with hiring managers and their leaders on progress towards those goals. Because again, accountability is one of our core values, and people are open to those conversations because they understand that that's how we operate.
Right. It's just so, like, let's just recap the success that your company has had implementing that, because I really want to drive this point home. So like, can you tell us again about your headcount last year, growth goals, and the amount of hiring?
Yeah. So we were able to hire 2x the number of people that we had hired the year before. And so in 2022, we still got a week left in the year, but I think we're done. It's 2 days before Christmas, so I think we're done with hiring this year. But I think we're going to end with 937 folks that we've hired this year, all the way from, like I said, the C-suite down to our field sales agents, who are the lifeblood of our company. And not only were we able to double our hiring, not only were we able to scale. But to me, scale is not just increasing production, but it's also maintaining or improving efficiency. And we were able to scale by doubling our size, and we were able to stay just as efficient, and in many cases, even more efficient than we were when we were doing half the production that we were doing last year, right? And so to me, that goes back to things like a tight process and having that optimized pipeline and the tech stack and all those things. But it starts with the buy-in from the hiring managers, and it starts with the process.
Hell yeah. No, I mean, that's brilliant. And that's why I wanted to slow down on that point and really drive that home. I mean, what you're saying about scale is just, you're right. I mean,
Yeah.
I see this a lot in tech, right? I mean, the tech is notorious for hyping up raising money, but running at a significant loss, and basically just talking about like raising money at scale or hiring people at scale, which is total BS, right? Like if you raise money, you've just taken on a like an obligation, right? Like
Yeah.
it's, you're
It's dead.
just right. Right. Or, at a minimum, it's like you're not actually achieving scale in terms of generating more value to the marketplace.
Yeah.
It's not a direct correlation. I mean, there might be, obviously like it gives you the opportunity to build better products and build a go-to-market team. But, I think it's really the focus should be on like, okay, what does the unit economics look like at scale? And I think that should be the same philosophy that departments take. It's like, okay, if it's, whether or not it's a go-to-market team or a recruiting team, it's, can you scale a relatively similar cost per hire?
Yeah.
When you,
Yeah.
and then you have to look at like scalable channels. Like you might have a channel that's producing, a certain amount of hires, but it might be taking up like a huge amount of bandwidth for your talent acquisition team. So you might need to say, okay, we're generating hires, but it's our least efficient, lowest converting hiring source. So we would do better off just cutting this altogether and then allowing our recruiters to work on the most efficient, most scalable sources. And so I don't think enough companies within talent acquisition are really considering it from that perspective.
And it's not even the sources, right? Like sources is one thing, but you can look at for efficiency in how the recruiter works, right? Like what responsibilities does the recruiter have, and is their time best used doing those things, or can we continue to build out the TA organization and bring somebody else in and offload some of those responsibilities? And that was one thing that I'd seen was our recruiters were spending probably a third of their time focused on things that were taking them away from being, interacting with candidates, right? And so, I mean, they're most talented at interacting with, engaging with, and talent, right? Recruiting. And if they're stuck behind a desk and working on reports and data entry and all that stuff, then it doesn't make sense. So it's not just efficiency in our sources, but it's also efficiency in how you work and how your TA organization is built out.
Oh, totally. Totally. And I think there's just so much to be learned from revenue orgs when it comes to efficiencies, when it comes to tools accessible to SDRs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Like how many talent organizations are running like SDR tech stacks? Right.
Yeah, I won't say none, but it's few, right?
Right. And none isn't the right, but it feels like none, at least in the conversations I have. Right. It's like, might as well be. I don't know.
Absolutely. And part of that is, let's give our teams the tools that they need to succeed. Yes, there's going to be a cost of implementing those tools, but eventually there's going to be huge return on investment in terms of savings and production.
Oh yeah.
And we looked at I evaluated the tech stack when I got here, and we said, okay, where are some inefficiencies in our tech stack? And we said, our recruiters are using their personal devices to send text messages to candidates, right? And that's how candidates communicate, is through text message a lot of the time. And so we were losing all that data, right? All that activity was on a personal device in a different state that we had no visibility into. And we could not, it was not keyword searchable. It wasn't usable to us, right? And so I said, let's just bring that all into the ATS. Let's bolt something onto the ATS that allows us to do that. And so now we've got that in place, and we send text messages to our candidates directly from our ATS. All the SMS communication is inside our ATS. It's keyword searchable. Everybody has visibility into it, and just made us that much more efficient.
Yep. And which ATS are you using?
We're on Lever.
Okay, that's right. And you recently implemented
for high volume. No, we've been a Lever organization since before I got here. So that was already in place, and it is one of the leading ATSs out there for high volume recruiting, which is what we do.
And which plugin do you use for text messaging?
So we use something called Grayscale for text messaging, and plugs into Lever. Lever's got an open API, so it allows it to bolt on pretty quickly and easily
Cool.
with very little effort.
Nice. And so you also, one thing we talked about is having a data stack on top, having a team of data analysts, data visualization, analysis, a team helping with that, and a kind of a data stack on top of Lever to get better reporting. Can you tell us more about just the evolution of when you started to where you are now, and how you're thinking about the future and leveraging a tool like that and a data analysis team? I would love to get your personal experience and what you've seen as a progression over the past couple of years and over the next year.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So when I got here, I distinctly recall that we had almost zero visibility into the recruiting data. I really had no easy way to find out even how many people that we had hired the previous year or further back. So we were at kind of the bottom when it came to how much insight we had into data. Our ATS reports were flawed because there wasn't a lot of consistency. And it wasn't because we didn't have the ability to do it. It was because the recruitment function had been decentralized and it was handled by a lot of individual field offices and hiring managers. And so there just wasn't a lot of top-down strategy when it came to that, right? And whatever reporting that we did have was super manual. That was literally put into an Excel sheet weekly by somebody on the recruiting team, right? So the data was there, but it was spread across tons of different systems and departments, and there wasn't that consistent logic to use for reporting. So step one, like I said, was I needed to know what I was dealing with, and so I wanted to build a dashboard to visualize that pipeline, right? And that's where I turned to our very talented business intelligence team. And these folks are so incredibly talented that all I had to do was really paint a picture of what I needed, and they were able to take it from there. And in about 6 weeks, maybe even less, we had our first kind of data visualization tool, which was a dashboard that visualized the pipeline, including time metrics, right? Like time to hire is super important. We talked about how important speed is, right? So time metrics were built into it as well. And then it became really easy to get insights from that, right? To see some patterns developing and see, have my beautiful mind moment and see all the numbers flashing before me and say, okay, this is where I see data smoke. And so I know that there's a business fire there, right? So, and then that we then evolved that into so much more. Now we have dashboards that visualize the right recruiting data for each of our audiences, right? Hiring managers have a dashboard, executives have a dashboard, our individual recruiters have a dashboard, our recruiting leaders have dashboards, right? So we've gotten kind of dashboard happy. We recognize the importance of it and the importance of that it brings to accountability. And now, moving into 2023, we're gonna blow all that out and get even better with it.
Okay. And so tell us about that, like, your current stack, and then, what I suppose the limitations thereof, and then what you're going to move forward with.
Yeah. So right now we're Google Data Studio, right? And that's really, it's driven by manually kind of importing data into Google Data Studio, and then it then displaying it. And it works great. It delivers what we need. But with all the data that we're running and the volume of data that we have, and not just in recruiting, right? We're a sales organization, so we got a ton of Salesforce data and all that stuff, right? So I want to say that our BI team is moving towards, in 2023, we're going to move towards Snowflake for our data cloud, and then ThoughtSpot on top of that, right? Which is going to be, and ThoughtSpot is, I don't know if you know about it, but it's a very search and AI driven analytics platform that allows you to get really granular with literally billions of rows of data, right? So it learns from usage, and we can ask it questions, and it'll give us answers and insights that we couldn't dream of with the manual Google Data Studio process. So I'm kind of excited about that.
Yeah,
I'm
I
ready
love
to
it.
nerd out on it.
Well, hey, when you've implemented it, like you got to come back on the show to tell us how it's going. I mean, I would love to hear about the implementation process as well as the results that you're generating. Like, is it
Yeah.
actually doing what you need it to do? So maybe this time next year we
Yeah,
jump on
and
another
maybe I'll
episode.
bring my peer from the BI team, who's
Yes.
really who's the brains behind all this, and his team is the one who's doing all the implementation. And Seth Mitchell, and he is his team is just, like I said, super talented, and they are passionate about data, and they really understand the business, and they really understand each business unit's kind of needs.
Oh, I love that. I love that. In fact, if Seth wants to come on sometime in the next month or two, I mean, if he's open to it, I'd love to have him on the show. And then like a year from now, we have both of you guys on just talking about the process. So just give him a
I'll
let him know.
I'll give him a call.
Yeah, let him know I want him on the show. So yeah, we haven't actually had somebody on the BI team come on the show yet. So I think that a lot of the talent leaders tuning in would be really interested in that. So yeah, we already look at this doing one podcast. We already got two more lined up. Hopefully, if Seth's open to it.
I'm building out your content calendar.
Oh yeah,
James.
hell yeah. Hey, I appreciate it, man. Anytime I have some really good insights, I try to, how can we extrapolate this and add more value? So
For
I
sure.
love it. I think just to like, so we're talking a lot about optimization of data, different tools to optimize that. Let's get into what specific metrics you are tracking, and then as indicators of success. And then I also, I'm just going to ask this now so I don't forget, but you don't have to like, I'll say this again, but I would like to also get into like, do you do any segmentation in terms of like region or department? So there's like different workflows or different, approaches to monitoring pipelines and stuff like that. So I'd like to, again, I got to stop doing these two-part questions. It's like something I always do, but like first getting into core metrics and then segmentation by either region or department would be interesting to dive into.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So core metrics, right? What we look at, right, is we try to it starts with the pipeline. We want to visualize our pipeline. We want to see the raw activity numbers, right? Like how many candidates did we have, and how many phone screens were scheduled, and how many were conducted, and how many first interviews were scheduled, how many actually happened, just all the way down to the offer, and the offer acceptance rate, all the way to hire, right? And then we track the time between each of those stages, and and then we look at a lot of the kind of the ratios between the two, right? So really the metrics between the stages, right? Like what's the conversion rate between a phone screen and a first interview, and how many offers are being signed, and how many how many people are actually showing up on day one after they sign an offer. What's our drop off rate? Knowing all those things helps us again really spot issues that we can triage and fix pretty quickly.
Yeah, I love it. And so when you're looking at conversion rates and pipelines, do you segment by department? Because I would assume like for sales roles, you're going to see different time and stage and conversion rates
Yeah.
than.
So yeah, no. So on the sales side of the house, we've got two roles that we're primarily recruiting for and hiring for, right? And so we'll segment between those two roles, and then, like I said, we've got 40. We're in 22 states and 40 markets. We've got 70 something hiring managers just on the sales side, right? And so we can break it down by each hiring manager, by each team, as to what their individual metrics are. Now, some of that data is not as reliable because you've got a smaller sample size. So we always want to kind of go back up to the main data set, but it gives us some insights, right? So if a conversion rate is way off for one hiring manager or one region, then we can spot it and we can say what's the issue there, right? Like let's talk about it, let's figure it out, let's see what we can do to fix it.
I love it. And I think so we're coming up on time. I want to give some more tactical takeaways on talent acquisition leaders and how they can think about budget allocation for the following year, and think about how to present to other members of the executive team. And so my first question is, when you're looking at evaluating your budget and determining where your spend is going to be most effective, do you have any tips on how to go about doing that when you look at, okay, what channels should we be investing in the most? It's not as straightforward as just like simply looking at like one metric, right? I mean, there's probably a lot that goes into making those decisions. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on how you think about budget allocation and how you're going to spend and invest in your department.
Yeah, at kind of at a high level, right? Again, it goes back to the importance of knowing your data and having that data driven mindset and building that data infrastructure early on, so that you can then make these decisions, right? And you can trust the numbers, right? That's really important, that you trust the data. And I for example, I know that for a specific type of role, I need X amount of applicants to get Y amount of hires, right? So when we're planning for next year, or when we're planning for the future, I'm going to look and see, well, how many of those types of individuals do I need to hire? How many of those positions do I need to fill in the next year? And how many applicants do I need to generate in order to fill those positions? Once I have that number, then I can go into it and say, okay, where am I going to get those applicants, right? So I need Y amount of applicants. Where do I find them? That's where I then go back into the data and I look at our different data sources, not our data sources, our applicant sources, our candidate sources, and figure out where they're going to come from, and that's where the investment goes, right? And we've got to balance things like, yes, there might be some sources that are more costly, but they might produce a higher quality candidate, and there might be some sources that are really inexpensive but they cause a lot of extra work and a lot of they bring in a lot of junk, right? The pure dollar to generate that applicant might be much lower, but it takes a lot more work to nurture them and close them and bring them along and weed through all the trash, and so it ends up adding to the cost.
All right, and I think that's just to slow down on that. I think that's actually something that talent acquisition leaders really need to be aware of is if you have an inefficient channel, it's going to be much worse at scale. So if you have an inefficient channel and you're a 100% company, if you don't if you don't change that, when you get to 200 people or 400 people, it's going to continuously make your team less efficient, and it's going to continuously increase your cost per hire. And so one of the things you have to look at is not just percentage of placements, but you actually have to get into what are all the resources going in to that channel, and are we actually collecting an actual cost per source, cost per hire per source? Because maybe something is accounting for 20% of your hires, but it's accounting for 50 or 60% of the recruiter's time. And so you have to understand the time ratio as well as you can as well. And I think that's a problem that maybe it can be hard to diagnose. And so that's why I wanted to slow down on that, just to make sure everybody's
it can certainly be hard to diagnose, and I'm lucky enough to be working at kind of a level of scale where the data can give us a lot of information very quickly, because there's a lot of it, right? But if you're in an organization where you're responsible for hiring 50 or 100 people a year, maybe you might not have really a big enough sample size of data to just completely trust it. So that's where really understanding the process and open communication lines with the recruiting team and soliciting feedback and things like that matter, because that fills in the gaps that maybe the data can't, right? It gives context to the data.
Right. So my follow-up question to that is, like, how do you go about tracking the ratio between time spent and amount of hires made? Because I think that's an important stat. It's like, again, what if somebody is spending 60% of their time on something that's producing 20% of hires, and 40% of their time on something that's producing 80% of hires? This is just a high level thought experiment. How do you go about note? I mean, because it's obviously going to be more nuanced and probably not that obvious. So
Yeah.
how do you go about identifying those types of challenges?
Yeah. So I'll go back to what I said earlier, right? Where there's
Right.
data smoke, there's a business fire, right? So I'm looking at the data to maybe see if there's a kind of an indication of that happening, right? Is there a hiring manager or a rec or a recruiter that is less productive, is kind of off the baseline, right? And that's the data smoke, and that's where we then dig in and kind of examine and investigate and figure out what's wrong, right? Um, and again, it's knowing your people and knowing your process, right? So that's where it's really, really important for any talent acquisition leader to really be in the trenches and understand exactly what happens from start to finish.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think that comes down to like the line managers, people at the management director level that just understand their team. They're collecting feedback. It's not only about the data, but it's digging in there, talking to people. I think one interesting thing too could be depending upon how big the talent acquisition team is maybe segmenting channels by recruiter. So not everybody's working on the same channels, but you have a certain team of recruiters or a recruiter working with one or two channels and another recruiter working with a couple different channels. So then you can kind of separate performance on a per recruiter basis and see what's producing better outcomes versus blending everything together across the entire team. What are your
Yeah,
thoughts on that?
you could definitely do that, but again, I think that might be a manual solution and then maybe not a scalable solution, right? And so that's where I love my dashboards, right? Because in my dashboards, I've got drop downs for not just different locations and regions and all that, but individual recruiters and recruiting sources, and then position titles, right? And so then I can run a query and I can say recruiter X using source Y. What's their, what are the pipeline metrics there? And then versus recruiter X using source Z, what are
Right.
the pipeline metrics there? What's the difference? And you can diagnose things pretty quickly without having to kind of have that manual workaround of segmenting out your recruiting team and whatnot.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I think this is probably a good stopping point. This has been an incredibly insightful episode. This is going to guide talent strategy. I'm very hopeful that everybody tuning in, you're going to take this episode, you're going to drop it into a Slack channel, you're going to share it with the CEO, you're going to share it with the VP of talent acquisition, your chief people officer, your VP of HR, whoever you need to, because this is the type of stuff that actually moves the needle and empowers you to reach your hiring goals. As much as we love talking about other very important topics like culture, DE&I, things that we have to keep top of mind, there isn't enough coverage on this type of content, which is usually a huge blind spot for a lot of organizations. Not all of them, but there's obviously great talent leaders out there that know this stuff, and that's the ones we invite on this show. So that we can educate the other, other people in the market. So just make sure that you're taking this to heart. You're sharing this with your team. And I hope this has been helpful. And Rahul, I thank you so much for coming on this show and giving us a masterclass on this topic. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. And, really the only parting wisdom I have for any of my peers listening is, really understand that you have an impact to the bottom line of your business, and it's much more than just hiring people. You're helping to grow the business. You're helping to drive revenue.
I love it. I love it. And Rahul, if people want to engage with you online, maybe they want to just connect with you just for future purposes or whatever else, is there a way that they could potentially get in contact with you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. My LinkedIn is probably the best way to find me. That's how we met each other, LinkedIn. So I'm definitely on there. And James, I think you're going to drop a link to my LinkedIn in the description or the bio or wherever in the podcast. And so find me on LinkedIn, send me a message. Happy to engage. Happy to answer any questions that anybody might have, and just happy to connect.
Love it. Love it. And for everybody tuning in, I wanted to let you know that if you are getting value from this show, we'd really appreciate a review on Apple Podcasts as well as on Spotify or whatever streaming service that you use. And coming up in the new year, we're going to be even more organized, taking the show to the next level. We're going to be posting at consistent times and bringing a little bit more structure to certain parts of the show to make sure that you're getting the maximum amount of value. Also, make sure to check us out at tatrends.io. That's the website for the show where you can find a archive of the entire show's transcripts, and you can also share with folks who want to apply to be a guest, or if you'd like to apply as well, if you're a VP of talent acquisition or a CPO, we'd love to hear from you. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll talk to you next time. Take care.